to in a different way, to being a true strategic partner and collaborator, that's lit another flame in me. That's taken us, I think, in this to the next level. Michael's known me a long time. You would never get me to sit here and do this probably even a year ago. So evolving to saying, this isn't about my discomfort. I need to be more comfortable talking about this for a lot of reasons. And because what we're trying to do with Impact Collaborative is much bigger than any of us can think about, and it should have nothing to do with me. That's how I want to create it. And if we make the not-for-profit world the way we're talking about, we will put ourselves out of business. That is the goal. I'm actually, and I think Claire's aligned with this, and Michael and everybody on our team, it's never about us. We're trying to do the opposite of what successful people do and almost make ourselves extinct, and that will be the success.
I'm sending you heart signs from here.
Well, hello and welcome to a podcast with no name. We are here with some extraordinary folks. We have the wonderful Tracy Donnelly, who is the founder and president of the Impact Collaborative, and we are joined by Executive Director Dr. Claire, who is here with us today to talk about impact storytelling. And I am joined by my dear friend. You may recognize him from internet fame, from hits like, well, you might know him.
It's great. It's the impact I've left.
Oh, no. Everybody knows and loves Greg of The Real Rejects. And, you know, Greg, you've been doing such an amazing job talking about mental health in The Real Rejects Diaries. And we wanted to have this conversation to help people understand a little bit about what impact storytelling really is. And sometimes you don't realize when you're watching something or listening to your favorite podcast or reading your favorite book that what you're engaging with is actually something that is really creating a level of empathy that allows you to step into the shoes of somebody else and see the world in a different way. And there's so many different ways to help the world. And I just love that you've taken your passion and your skills, especially in the YouTube internet space, and have been able to figure out a way to turn that into something that does good. So, Greg, I'd love to just start off. What is impact storytelling to you?
Impact storytelling to me, I equate it to kind of like, if you're on social media, you can see a cool picture with a quote and you go, oh, that's cool, I should remember that. But then you get distracted immediately by something else and you move on. And I think a lot of people consume movies and or shows in a very similar fashion, when I think if you allow the art of it to actually, well, impact you, actually sit with it. Like, you can read a quote online versus listening to someone speak for an hour versus listening to an audio. And that helps to educate and start a transformation and put you on a path to change. And I feel like impact storytelling can be maybe not the thing that changes you, but starts the change. You know, one example that comes to mind for me is when I was young, I grew up around kind of a lot of racism. And I saw one movie when I was a child. It sounds really silly, but that's the point, is to be childlike about how you receive a story, in my opinion. And it was Remember the Titans. And that's a story for those who don't know. It's in the 60s where it stars Denzel Washington as Coach Boone. And it was taking a group of black kids and white kids and forcing them in a very racist town to work together as a football team. And there's this one scene when they're doing drills where they're going strong side, left side. You see this black guy and this white guy coming together. And maybe nowadays you might look back and go, kind of cheesy, but when I was a kid, something dawned on me that started a reflection to go, maybe racism is not okay, or I didn't even register that I might have had some racial point of views that I needed to change, you know? So there's something like that. Or it could be something as simple as I did not know how to socialize when I was younger. So watching the show Friends, I really gravitated towards Chandler Bing as a form of like humor to use how to connect with people. And I think especially for children, like the development of it. But if you can let it educate you as an adult, that can be so profound. I don't know if you guys have seen the movie The Substance. I don't know if you've seen it. I am not a woman. I don't know what it's like to have a female perspective in life. So when I saw that, it put me on a path of rumination of a section of society that I do not understand quite that well. And right before filming this, Michael introduced me to an individual named Kim. Kim was telling me that she grew up in a upper middle class to wealthy African American neighborhood, and I started thinking, oh, when I was watching Black people on screen, it's usually like hood movies or something like that growing up, or slave movies, and she was blowing my mind that I grew up in California and I had really no awareness that there are thriving African American neighborhoods out here that do not get a spotlight. And I was like, that's a chance for a good story to be told. That's not like the one Black family in this white neighborhood, but really represent a different side of a community, you know?
It's amazing because you think about a show like the Jeffersons or the Cosby Show at the time, and it completely, at a moment when there is still this segregation was not some abstract historical concept. It was the reality that everyone who was consuming this content had experienced. And yet to see affluent, educated,
full, happy African American families was a transformative thing for not just the Black experience and what that means for the communities.
but I think even more importantly, for those that may have never had a personal relationship or interacted with people that look different than them. And I love what you said, and something that really resonates with me is I love Star Wars, anybody that knows me. And something I've always loved about Star Wars is that they're able to, when you're dealing with narrative storytelling, you're able to take people to a different place that helps get them out of the context of their day-to-day for a moment, where we have the things that we like, we have the things that we don't like, and we have a sense of, you might not say it, but you have certain preconceived notions about the world. But when you're placed somewhere like a galaxy far, far away, and you're exploring these same concepts that are a big part of your reality, for instance, A New Hope in the first Star Wars film, immediately you have a bar that has segregation. And Lucas, when he wrote this, he was pissed off about what was going on in Vietnam. He was pissed off about all these different things. And he wanted to explore it in a way that people could enter it, experience, and empathize, but avoid all of the buzzwords that instantly make people shut down. And I think that was a bit ahead of its time in that there was so much nuance to his form of impact storytelling. And Star Trek did the same thing. Star Trek had this crazy notion of, the Americans and the Soviets were at the height of the Cold War. We thought we were going to drop the bomb at any time. And so what did they do? They created an iteration of the future that had a ship that had an American captain and had a Soviet navigator. And people saw, oh, wow, there's a world in which we figure this crap out and we can work together and live together. Not just that, but they had the first interracial kiss. But they recognized that you couldn't get away with an interracial kiss. So what did they do? They gave it to a half Vulcan, half human, so that it was not just interracial black and white. It was interracial, they're a whole other species, which helped soften the blow of the public's reaction to the moment. And I think that's what people forget often about storytelling, is that the most impactful storytelling is the subtle stuff. And And with our team at Multihouse, I talk about the gummy vitamins. You don't need to know that what you're consuming is actually really, really good for you. All you care about is that it tastes good. And if it's a great story, if it's a good tasting gummy, it doesn't matter that it's full of vitamins. And that philosophy, and it's one of my favorite things about the channel and what you do, is that in a very organic way, as you're going through and reacting to a film or a TV show, you're able to capture these emotions and in real time help validate for those out there all around the world what they're experiencing and what they're feeling. And then at the same time, you're able to, in real time, acknowledge your bias. There is such a wonderful opportunity in that to really reflect and give people permission to, like, even what you said, there's so many people in the world that would be scared to say that they grew up in a racist household and probably had some underlying racist ideology built into their childhood experience. But we're scared to say that because we have a really hard time accepting that people have the capacity to change and evolve.
That's
Well, part of Real Rejects Diaries is getting past this. I would be categorized as YouTuber or influencer or something, right? And I think like what we were talking about beforehand, Claire and I, if I can mention, you were talking about difficulties with sometimes imposter syndrome. And before we were recording, I'm like, well, I think that's the kind of thing that as a leader, admit to that and mention it, that you have that, because then people connect with you. And I think a lot of times online, if we're talking about mental health, online awareness, I think getting past, I think you learn so much more from people's struggles and failures more than a lot of times than someone's successes. And I think it's important to be honest about that, especially in a world that seems to have a disconnect because we watch people on our phones now and we feel like we're connecting, but we don't really know them, that it's important that we can be honest. So I'm excited to talk to you both, honestly, because I admire what you both have been accomplishing and doing.
A lot of the times, racism, sexism, whatever-ism, biases are natural, right? So it's a mental shortcut sometimes. But the impact storytelling or storytelling in general is trying to shift the norm a little bit so that you can relate to a single individual as another human being instead of a label. And that is extremely powerful. So let's say representation of Asians in the social media or in just in public spaces. Like in recent years, there is more diversity in terms of the lives. It's no longer this either a struggling immigrant or a model citizen. There's just more sort of shared humanity, and that matters. And that shift, that norm really matters. And to what Greg was just talking about, a lot of the times, women, very accomplished women, are struggling with imposter syndrome. It's because the norm of success and what that looks like is oftentimes about this very well-spoken white man in a suit, usually tall and commanding in that masculine kind of way, that makes others feel like we have to show up to the world in that way. Otherwise, it's the opposite of success. So I think that is where I feel like this conversation is so interesting, that storytelling and making an impact, making a connection with people could take different forms, but it is really to diversify the perspectives about human experiences. And lastly, we know traditionally, cameras, microphone, that means power. Airtime, that means power. And so where does that power structure lies? History is oftentimes written by powerful upper class white men. And that matters, that now we can rewrite that power dynamic and structure. So I'm really optimistic and I'm excited about where this conversation is going.
One of the really interesting things that has sort of been, because I love history, and Hollywood is sort of a curious thing because the industry has really only been around for about a century. And, a lot of people, and I think about, and I hope each of us sort of touches in our own ways about the reflection of ourselves in media in terms of representation, but not just representation. I think there's the big difference between the representation and then the actual authenticity of said representation, because Lord knows a lot of storytellers have been telling stories that they probably should have taken a step back and let another voice actually tell. And one of the really interesting things about Hollywood that we don't talk about is that, there's the stereotype. And I'm quite literally, I'm saying this as the stereotype. I'm a New York Jewish producer who lives in Hollywood and works in film development and television development. Where does that stereotype come from? Well, the history is actually a really interesting one. You had, at the turn of the century, as film technology was in its infancy, you had a group of Jewish immigrants, and they were genuinely immigrants, not second generation, not first generation. They had all just fled from all different sorts of circumstances. And they are brilliant, talented minds from all their respected countries. But because of their ethnicity, because of their faith, they were ostracized. And when they came to the States, the only jobs that they could get were working on the factory floor lines. And some of them had this kind of crazy notion of, there's this really new, interesting technology, the Edison light bulb. They've been able to figure out how to capture moving pictures. It's a crazy concept. We're going to call them pictures. And they came out to California and they settled down. They saw some empty real estate, and they built the first studios. And actually, they built it right down the road from where we are right now. In 1911, the first studio was built in Hollywood. And they invented an industry because nobody else would hire them. No other industry would welcome them because of who they were. And it's sort of an interesting thing that for a population that I think represents 0.02% of the global population, that you see an almost overrepresentation in a way of the Jewish experience. And that was a result of the very first storytellers in the industry were just a group of Jewish immigrants that really, really wanted people to know that they weren't evil. And, as time has gone on, of course, the industry has changed, and we've seen all of these sort of dramatic shifting moments. And, one of the really sort of curious things that occurred is that for a long time, there was this notion of, okay, we're going to do a TV show. And on that TV show, we need to have one Black actor. We need to have one Asian actor. We need to have one queer actor. And we've done it. We've solved all the problems. We've achieved diversity, and there's, but the reason they were doing that wasn't because they were trying to achieve diversity. It's because they were trying to market to these respective audiences, which is why over and over and over again, these concepts failed, because audiences see through the performative. And Hollywood never really gave enough credit to individuals or necessarily respected communities enough to say, hey, maybe people can handle complex, intricate stories that aren't just the surface level stereotypes. Even if the intent was good, the result was something that was performative. And I think a lot of the pushback that we see now, especially conversations around DEIB and all these different things of, why is there a woman as the main character in Star Wars? You hear all this crap all the time over and over and over again. But the reason is because the intention was to check boxes, not to tell the authentic stories. And audiences maybe didn't know how to communicate that, but you certainly see it in the outburst. And I always find it interesting. I look at a show like, I'm sorry to go on Star Wars tangent here, but I look at a show like Andor, for instance, which covers all these different bases, talks about gender, talks about race, it talks about fascism and intricacies of government and politics. And it's able to do it in a way that rises above the performative nature and lets people get back down to basics. And I'm optimistic that we're beginning to understand that, while there are stories that are inherently Black or inherently queer, that doesn't mean that they're just for Black audiences or just for queer audiences. They are stories that everybody can enjoy. And, and I'm sure we'll get into some of the cool projects in the past 10 years that really have changed that mindset. But back to you, Greg, with your great questions.
To springboard off of that, I think what happens when people want to be like, no, we got to be more broad. I think actually you lose a voice and appeal. I think when you become more specific in your storytelling, even if it is about a culture, I think you actually get more universal appeal. Weirdly enough, we saw it with Sinners that just came out. And so, yeah. In every good story, you want to know like a character's motivation, a character's goals. But the thing is, it's not really the goal that gets you drawn to the character. What gets you drawn is the why behind the goal.
Always
Just
the
like
why.
always the why, just like in life, right? So as we were talking yesterday, Tracy, you were saying, you know, you got to know your why, you got to know your why. I was getting an idea of the why behind what impact does, but I was like, for the leaders here, I want to know why you have the why. I want to know where that comes from, you know? So if we can like take it back a little bit, let's hear your story then. What is your why, and where does that why come from?
I think I've always done this work, right? So I don't know if it's so much of who I am, but I do catch myself constantly revisiting the why. For me, it always comes back to authenticity and empathy and compassion. So I may not have had a similar experience that you had, speaking even about how you grew up or feeling these certain points, and not just what you talked about today. Any single person can talk about their life experience and what the impact had on them and how it's gotten them to who they are today, and ultimately gets you to your why and your drive and what you want to do. It's almost irrelevant, the actual individual experiences, as opposed to the feelings and the impact it's had on a person that can be transferable across many things, right? So when you talk about people that struggle with substance misuse, I remember many times, and this will go when you're doing treatment or speaking with folks, they'll always say, well, did you ever go through what I went through? Do you know what I went through? Because they want to know that you can understand how they're feeling, right? I don't ever really directly answer that question. I always say, well, let me ask you a question. Going through substance misuse, tell me what some of the feelings are that you had. And they'll say, well, I don't know. Because when you ask people how they feel, they say, good, fine. And I said, well, let's say that's not a feeling. Talk a little bit more about what that means. And it will say, well, I struggled. I felt loss. I felt anger. I felt despair. I felt like there was nowhere I can go. And I said, so do you imagine that I don't know what those feelings are, regardless if I can connect to your story or it told you I walked in your footsteps? No, but I think we can all engage. And it's what I was talking about. The why to me is the most important thing in running an organization, and the authenticity in leadership.
And what is that why?
So that why is you're wanting to make the world a better place and wanting people to actually care about each other. Like for me, it's always about thinking, like catching myself getting too comfortable in my circumstances is my why. My why is, okay, so what else can I be doing, right? This is how Impact Collaborative gets born, is we're starting to see really positive outcomes in Child Center. Here's a checkbox. And every time I see a dip in performance in Child Center, I equate it to the fact that we forgot our why. We forgot why we're here, and we're so busy on the how and the getting it done that it's like pause. And that's a hard concept to have with people that are relying on you for finances, for making sure the company runs right. I always have to say, we need to take a break for a minute, and I'll explain to the board, and talking about like running family wellness centers. Something's missing, right? And that's what changes people that have a why. They've went to school, they're licensed clinicians. I promise you, they didn't come to school to run businesses. They came to school to impact children and families' lives. They want to make a difference, right? That's my why. I want there to be a difference. I don't want a legacy. And I know people say that, like, that will be your legacy. I don't want a legacy. I want to just continue to create opportunities and circumstances to which people can exceed and excel. and remember how they felt when that happened, and then think about it when they speak to the next person and have some sort of compassion. So I want that change to be an internal driver. And that's like even with I will stop the staff and say, why are you here? Why are you here every day? What drives you to come to work? It's not a paycheck, I promise you, because in our world of not-for-profits, that's not what motivates people. I think we're all gathered, and that's why I wanted this collaboration with all kinds of not-for-profits is I believe those are like-minded people, and even if people have veered off the track, their why just needs to get that little igniting, like a spark that says, oh yeah, he said his why. I remember I used to think that. And where is that in myself? How come I got so hung up in the how I'm doing it and what the success is and the data and the metrics and not having the story behind the data or the narratives? Our numbers are not numbers, they're people. They're people. So that's where the storytelling in my world comes from. And that's why I think it is in entertainment. You leave a movie, I don't go and see a movie to be mind numb. I go with people I care about, and we pick a common movie that we think we'll all be interested in. And I know it's a great experience because when we leave, we're all like tumbling over each other. And what about that part? And could you believe they said this? Now we've generated a conversation that's so safe because we're talking about the movie, but the pieces we're talking about are really us because we connected to that character or that moment. And then it takes us to a next step to be vulnerable and say, yeah, I love that part when this happened to so-and-so. And someone turns around and says, why? Right? Back to the why. Because that happened to me once, or I felt that way one time. So to me, the why is the center of everything. And when I lose it in any part of my life, things don't go well at all.
Can we peel back the layer a little bit then and hear your story of how did this why of wanting, because a lot of people don't have that as like a why to like help people or serve people. Was there a specific type of struggle you had growing up or something you were exposed to that led to you perhaps nurturing this why or developing this why?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up pretty standard, but I always struggled with the norm, like the rules. Like I would go to school and get very good grades. And then I don't understand why I have to do homework. I really don't understand why I even have to go at most points. And that would be, I would sort of make my life very difficult in those circumstances. And then for the most part, I was always arguing a point for someone else or for something else. I always had this sense of injustice or something that I felt wasn't fair or didn't make sense in the world. And it would be like, if I can actually get 100 on this test, why do I need to continue to do repetitive things? So I started thinking about first the education system. And that's why the first thing I did was become a teacher because I felt like it wasn't going, I didn't want to fill a bucket with a kid like with knowledge. I wanted kids to have experiences. So even that teaching, I was like, I'm not going to take a lesson plan and regurgitate what somebody else did and then make kids write on paper. I wanted kids to have experiences that were like for science or things you would do. I would say, okay, let's go outside. Let's touch, let's feel, let's smell. Let's make it an experience for every kid in the classroom that doesn't want to sit still, that doesn't want to. I always found something that was an injustice. Like when we run not-for-profits, there are things that make no sense because a lot of it is driven by the government. I refuse to accept those things. So I think it was always having a feeling of uneasiness in the status quo. And it was inside of me all the time. I really think I always had ADD, ADHD. I was part of the LGBTQ community, and that was not accepted in the youngest of my years. But I really wish I could say even that. Like that to me was almost part of the same feeling, right? It was like I'm not coming out. I'm not having a discussion. I actually can like men and I can like women, but I never felt the need to explain it. And I was almost annoyed by having it be a thing. It was never a thing to me. So that was another And even now in the organization I'm in, sometimes it'll be LGBTQ month or something, and they'll say, we want to interview you. And I was like, really? Why me? Why so specific? Talk to anybody about what a relationship means or feels like. I promise you, I'm experiencing the same thing you're experiencing, right?
I love that your why is this like ravenous asking of the question why to everything that you perceive as dumb, which I think is so Tracy, number one, but so brilliant because it really does underscore we all go through our lives, but we never really stop and question why things are the way they are. And I think sometimes, especially if you're not somebody who's neurotypical or that, even just in the sort of the path that is lined out for, you start in kindergarten, then you work your way up the grades and you study really hard, you do well on your SATs, then you go to college. And after college, you get an internship and then you get a job and then you live happily ever after. If you don't fit that path, it's impossible not to ask the question, why are we doing this? And I just think that's such a fascinatingly interesting answer of.
It makes you do risky things, right? Which isn't smart. As you get older, you learn. I learned I couldn't sit still. First of all, I would be bored sitting still, but also it makes you extra risky in the things you're going to do. I have motorcycles. I like to go fast. I jump out of planes. I like adrenaline, right? And that kind of stuff is, when you get a little older, you get a little smarter. It's like I had to ask my why on that. Why do I constantly feel this need to put myself in danger, right? And that's, you go to counseling, I go to therapy. I want to be able to talk about, what's driving me. Why can't I sleep at night when I'm thinking of things? Or if I hear, gee, there's a roadblock, that actually is like fuel to me. And I say, we're not taking no on that. This took us a long time to get to where we are. And, Claire went from being on the board, and I don't want to speak for you, but immediately I saw something because Claire was working in our innovation stuff. It was a research development and innovation and bringing up ideas. Claire was into it. She was saying like, I want to do this, but when you find somebody that has a balance to what you're doing, I feel like that's Claire says, okay, I hear your ideas and your thoughts. Let's talk about how we can now wrap it up into like put it all together so that we're able to make it the program we want to make it. If she buys into it, and if she doesn't, she challenges it and then challenges me to think about it. And I like that challenge and I like to learn. So I think this has been for me great in seeing Claire shift from being a board member who you talk to in a different way to being a true strategic partner and collaborator that's lit another flame in me that's taken us, I think, in this to the next level. Michael's known me a long time. You would never get me to sit here and do this probably even a year ago. So evolving to saying, this isn't about my discomfort. I need to be more comfortable talking about this for a lot of reasons. And because what we're trying to do with Impact Collaborative is much bigger than any of us can think about, and it should have nothing to do with me. That's how I want to create it. And if we make the not-for-profit world the way we're talking about, we will put ourselves out of business. That is the goal. I'm actually, and I think Claire's aligned with this, and Michael and everybody on our team. It's never about us. We're trying to do the opposite of what successful people do and almost make ourselves extinct. And that will be the success.
Beautiful.
And I'm sending you heart signs from here because I also very much appreciated the evolving nature of our collaboration. At the same time, I also selfishly hope that we don't drive ourselves out of business because I love this job.
Yes.
And in fact, just to be real here, that, I see the work of the nonprofit community-based organizations is to really address this imbalance of voices and power. And there will always be the voices that did not get, at the table. Not being heard. So I think being the voice for the voiceless and really able to move the norm, move the world forward so that there is true connection, and which is such a luxury item in the world we live in right now. I often think about like, right now we have access to information, people, quote unquote connection 24/7 on our fingertips. And looking at the proliferation of AI, you can have an AI best friend with no cost. So the genuine connections, true sparks between two people, two minds, between organizations who think the same way or think differently about things, but having a meaningful exchange, that is very precious, and it will be more precious going forward. Oftentimes, sometimes in nonprofit, we do run into this: is your why more noble than my why?
Interesting.
It's very true.
Wow. Okay.
So you often heard people like, "Oh, I wanted to give back to the community." I think that is true. My why, as when I was younger, like Tracy, I was raised in this idea of things need to be fair, first of all. So I like to think about things in the sort of justice, fair, am I getting more than you did? Or vice versa. Thanks to my parents and my upbringing, I'm also ingrained with this idea that true wealth is what you can give away. True knowledge is what you can teach other people. And so it's not about hoarding what you get, but the act of being able to support someone else, either like, oh, I'm better with, let's say, physics. Let me help you with physics while you have to help me with my geography. That exchange is so precious and so interesting to me. So I think as I was working in different sectors, I was in academia, went into public sector, and public service is such a privilege. I have to really say that. And now working with Tracy in this nonprofit and really trying to unleash this collective power, I think my why has been driven by curiosity a lot. Like, how do we do things better, and how do we not waste time in human beings? These are precious things. To spin the wheel, trying to, solve problems in our own orbit. And I think that's a waste of time. So for me, that really drives my intellectual curiosity. Like, how do we do things better together?
I think it's so important to learn like your guys' whys because we know your goals. So knowing the why behind it.
What's
makes
your
a
why,
difference.
Greg?
My why is to help people. I believe my why to be help people feel more of their feelings. That's what I care about. I think that's what storytelling does. I think that's what impact storytelling does.
I do too.
You know?
I think you're exactly right.
And I have found like I have discovered emotions I did not have that I possessed that I wasn't aware of. Sometimes I find myself crying at things and not knowing why I'm crying at this particular thing. And I feel like that's one of the universal appeals of storytelling. Doesn't matter what political side you're on, we could probably still enjoy a movie together in the same room. We could probably still have a similar laugh or be moved to tears by the same thing. Of course, it depends on the movie, but my point with that is that my point with that is it can create.
I cried at the Minecraft movie, and I don't know what was going on with me that day, but it happened.
Yeah, and sometimes we need that cry. Sometimes to the point of the emotion that you were talking about, Tracy. I love Tony Robbins, and one thing he talks about is like your state. And I have found so many times where I'm in a depressed state, a negative state, an angry state, and then a couple hours go by after a movie, and I'm like, oh, my state of being feels different. My mind feels different. Is it a cure-all? No, but again, it's about a path.
That's the very first episode of Diary of the Real Rejects that we did together. You came in and you're like, I'm not well.
Yeah.
But you said, but I'm pretty sure by the time we get going, I'll feel a little bit better. And it's funny because watching the first episode, you really see in real time the power that we have to completely just change the trajectory, not just of a lifetime, but of a moment, of a day, and to help us unpack those feelings in an interesting way. There is, it's funny because you don't really stop to think about the why. You're just kind of going and going. And as all of you were answering, the most interesting thing is that the why has evolved. It's grown with you. I think about in my favorite place in the world, it's just amazing camp tucked on a lake. There is this dirt brown road, and it's sort of this amazing path that just sort of leads you to all these different sort of other areas and these wonderful places. And as a kid, 11 years old, 12 years old, as I'm walking down the path, the thought occurred to me, there was somebody who walked this path for the very first time when it was rocks and grass, and slowly and surely they were able to create this path that has now become this thing that I get to enjoy. And I guess the why, as I think about it, for me, when I was younger, it was, I want to make that path for somebody else. And as I've gotten older, and part of what I love about the Impact Collaborative and about impact storytelling is that I don't want to be the one to make the path. I want to tell stories and help people find the resources that they need to make their own, and to tread on that and to go where they will, understanding that the path isn't just for them. It's for everybody that comes after. And it's not about their legacy, because that's the beautiful thing. Every road you've ever driven down, every adventure you've ever gone on, all the foundations of those experiences and where that comes from were made by somebody who you will never meet, a name you will never know. And that, to me, is the most beautiful thing of all.
Well, even your why, I think this is fascinating. When you said I was crying, like I'll watch a movie, or you said, Minecraft, I don't know why I'm crying. It's very similar to what you're saying. You actually do know, right? I will say that, right? And a lot of times when I would talk to, whether it was my kids or somebody I was talking to, and I would say, oh, you're upset. I do it to myself because I've gotten a little wiser to do it. I'm pretty religious about practicing Buddhism and stuff, but I would always say, what's going on? And why are you so angry? Why are you upset? And they'd say, I don't know. And I'd always say, all right, but if you did know, what would you say? And then they're like, well, because this and that and the other thing. And I'm like, okay, because it's a little less intrusive, because when you ask people, like, why do you feel that way? Did you ever notice? You don't necessarily get a great response. No. It's like, why are you so angry? It's like, what do you mean? Why am I so angry? I'm like, oh, wow, I just absorbed that anger in my own direction by asking that. It's not a smart question. But I did love when you said that. And I think that's the thing that happens when I'm doing the work and things are icky. And I'm always saying, I wonder what they're doing, what's happening here. And all of a sudden I say, none of those things I have any control over. And usually that's because I don't want to look at the one that I have control over, which is me.
That's amazing.
It's very true.
I wish we had a little bit more time, but Greg, I'd love if you don't mind closing us out with any final thoughts about what you hope people can take away from, how do they engage with impact storytelling? How can they be a part of it? And how can that maybe help them get a little closer to their why?
Oh, wow. That's a deep question.
It's going to get deeper every time you don't answer it.
I love that. Yeah. I think a lot of the time what you were talking about earlier, it of this comparison of your whys. I think you have to be the closest to not judging yourself as possible. Like, I'll end it with something really silly. I was telling Tracy about this yesterday. I've lost a lot of weight this year because I am determined to get a 6-pack. I've never had one. And I'm like, I'm going to do it. People ask why. And I'm like, well, truthfully, I just want the photo. I want the photo. I want to prove. But I've unpacked it more. That it's like, well, you know what it is that I believe in the power of discipline, and I believe that I can learn a new discipline and it can increase my resilience, because I think every lack of discipline affects other disciplines, and I feel like every act of discipline affects other disciplines. and this is a level for me to grow. So it's like that's been more of the actual reward, is that sometimes in pursuit of the what and the how, even if you don't really know your why, but once you start taking the action and you're following that feeling, the why starts to become a little clear. Sometimes
I
we feel
resonate
like
with that so much.
sometimes you feel like you got to like ruminate and like, let me just sit around for a while and think about it, and then maybe I'll act. And I was like, sometimes you got to actually start taking action if you got an intuition, and then you'll find that.
And the action is the spark.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
And a story can be the spark.
a story is
And-
often the spark.
And sometimes the story is what starts the action.
1,000%.
Every major life change I've ever had usually comes from that. Wow, I am feeling something right now, and I don't know how long I'm going to feel it for, but I'm going to use that to help me figure out where this is coming from. This has been awesome. We're going to need to do this again sometime.
I love that.
And for those out there who are listening, we are so fortunate to have such wonderful people in our orbit where we can have these kind of conversations that I think might be a little difficult to find online, and to be able to explore a little bit deeper just what makes storytelling so special. So thank you all for watching, and if you haven't, subscribe and all that important stuff, and we'll see you again hopefully real soon.